Welcome to Sustainability Scores, the podcast for research analysts who wants to unlock insights from corporate sustainability data. I'm your host Vikram Shetty. Today I am joined by my guest Anveshi to talk about BRSR Core. Anveshi, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vikram. Thank you for having me here.
For folks who are just meeting you for the first time, could you share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely, yes. So I am somebody who's been in the industry for a long 2 decades, in fact, 2 decades and a little more. But while that is where I have come from in a professional background, but where I am today is more to do with the fact that sustainability is a challenge that is not just specific to industry, specific to an individual. It's a little more global. So that's the space in which we are playing. We are, of course, in our pursuit of addressing this whole challenge on climate change and in overall sustainability, looking at how we could have large scale impact with corporates and through education initiatives that we also take up with some small education institutions, schools, and stuff. So, but otherwise, I think most importantly for this conversation, clearly corporates and what we do with them would be of interest. Yeah, that's the backdrop, I guess. I lead this company called AtQuest Sustainable Solutions, which is about 3 years and a little more into its existence.
Got it. So, would it be fair enough to say so you are more of a sustainability ESG consultant for the companies who wants to perceive their sustainability?
Yes, professionally, that would be how you will put it. But personally, if you were to ask me, I'd say enthusiast, evangelist, put those terms on me.
Got it. Got it. So the topic that we are going to talk about in today's episode is BRSR Core. So can
Yep.
you share with our listener what is BRSR?
Okay, so we probably have to jog a little, like a couple of years in the timeline, and with where it all began is when in the Indian Regulatory Authority for Sustainability Reporting, this one is called SEBI. The regulatory authority came up with an idea of transitioning from business responsibility reporting, which was called BRR, to something called business responsibility and sustainability reporting, BRSR. Now, that's the fact that the S was introduced was indicative enough that the authority out here was clearly looking at sustainability being a centerpiece of corporate reporting on the non-financial side. Now, when they introduced that and they brought out the templates and the structure for that, it was in the first year very voluntary in nature, meaning to say there was no compulsion for anybody to go for a BRSR reporting. The last financial year, which is financial year 22-23, was the first year for which every corporate in the top 1,000 club was expected to do a BRSR report mandatorily. So, as we speak right now, companies are putting together their first BRSR report based on the actions taken in the last financial year. So, that's the action that has happened on what I've just called as BRSR. In about March 2023, which is just a couple of months back, less than a couple of months back, March 29th to be specific, SEBI again came out with a notification that talked of the fact that not just about reporting on BRSR for top 1,000 companies, but let's take it a step further and ask for a third party mandatory reasonable assurance of the entire report so that the stakeholders who are using these reports are having a double assurance that there's absolutely no hoodwinking behind the report, there's no greenwashing behind the report, etc. So SEBI came out with what is called the BRSR Core, which is a bunch of 88 performance parameters that any third party authorized assurer or auditor will be going into these organizations, the companies, and checking them against and issuing them a certificate of the certificate for their report. So in short, it is basically a third party audit of your BRSR report.
Got it. And is it applicable for the only 1,000 or does the uh, factor of how many company who needs this BRSR core
Yeah.
have changed?
So the BRSR by itself is for the top 1,000. Of course, like I just said, this is the first year of it that is happening right now.
Right.
When it comes to the BRSR core, of course, they did not go out with all the top 1,000 right away. They've said let's look at the top 150 for this year, this current year.
Got
What
it.
they've said is we'll do with 150, and what it means is that once 150 is done, and the ambition is to go by 26-27 fiscal year 26-27. By that time, they want to do all the 1,000. Now, whether the 1,000 becomes another 2,000 and thereabouts is something that hasn't been explicitly mentioned, but clearly 150 today, this year, 2000 by 26-27 is what has been articulated.
Got it. So suppose if, let's say, someone from that 150 companies listening to this episode right now,
Yeah.
and how will they find this aggregated the raters who can give them certificate, where they can find them, and how to identify if they are qualified or not?
True. So that's a space that I don't think is so concrete yet in terms of who will be the right assurer for this. Because what, of course, we all know globally is that there's enough and more clarity for anything about financial audits. So when
Right.
it comes to something like ESG or non-financial audits, while in India also, I would be honest, there are companies, leading companies who have taken up non-financial ESG-based audits with global benchmarks like SA 8000 and all. This space of the BRSR core is absolutely new, so it hasn't yet been explored. But what I have also hearing is that clearly the conventional auditors, which is the big four and the likes of them, will definitely have their abilities and skills to kind of go for this kind of an audit as well. It will require them to build a set of new skills and capabilities, maybe, but I don't think it's a fast stretch to imagine that they will definitely be at the forefront of this exercises. At this point, no clear answers about where to fetch a library of such auditors or assurers.
Got it. Now that makes a little bit of a sense there. I understand you.
Yeah.
While we are setting up this conversation for this podcast, you mentioned something that this would be a quantum leap.
Okay.
So, can you dig into it, dive and explore it? Why do you mention that it will be a quantum leap?
Yeah, so when it comes to sustainability reporting in India, clearly that transition that I mentioned a while back, BRR to BRSR itself for the top 1,000 companies is quite a big deal because of the fact that when we say top 1,000 companies listed in the Indian markets, after about 150 to 180, which means ranking 150, 180 thereabouts, that's the large caps. Anything after 180 thereabouts is all mid caps till about 500, and then 500 all the way till 1,000 is all small caps. Now clearly we understand what we mean by large and mid and small because that's the kind of market capitalization they have. So when it comes to someone like a mid cap and a small cap company, which is like I just mentioned, a clear 80% of the 1,000 companies, they have only because of the BRSR started taking their first step towards reporting on sustainability. They wouldn't have otherwise probably even brought it into their ambit. Now, because they have just done that now, and currently we are again talking about that whole transitioning into BRSR core based assurance over a period of time, that's something that they have to now prepare themselves for, because once they do it, once they have to go through that rigor of an assurance, they will have to make sure that their entire DNA has to now accommodate this whole aspect of sustainability to the truest sense. Not just about putting in out numbers for the sake of putting out numbers, not just about ticking boxes for the sake of ticking boxes, but because now you will have somebody come in and check, assure, and certify that you've done it right. You will have to act very, very responsibly on this front, and that's why I call it a quantum leap. It's a shift in the DNA in a certain way.
Got it, got it, got it. And that's why kind of the impact on the Indian corporate is like it has to start that journey of I wouldn't like towards the sustainability. So they have to start their journey because this will kind of enforce it, quote unquote, in a way for
Yeah.
the Indian corporate.
Yeah, in fact, Vikram, I'll also extend that answer for a little more. Not just about the fact that there's an assurer, there's a third party coming in. The way this whole BRSR core has been introduced in that notification I mentioned that came in March, is that it is going to have effect on four different dimensions. Very obviously, the two dimensions that we've discussed. One is about the fact that companies will have to act a lot more mature in their reporting. Very obviously, that is an effect. Second effect is the fact that there will be an assurance or an audit kind of a community where they will have to upskill and come up with the ways to kind of assess and make sure that the assurance is done right. That's the second effect. But the other two are far more interesting. The third one is the fact that the BRSR core will be the basis for ESG ratings in India to a large extent. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So clearly in India, till about this notification came in, all of the companies were banking on ESG ratings from globally recognized names, whether it's a Sustainalytics, whether it's a S&P Global, MSCI, whoever. Now, what has been observed in by the Indian authorities and in the Indian corporate setup overall is that the methodologies or the rating approaches that these international agencies take isn't attuned to the Indian context, the realities of the Indian context, which is, like we all know, a growing economy. There's a lot of social aspect, I mean, significantly larger social aspect than in any other developed country. All of those aspects were not considered in the mix of the way the methodologies for these agencies were evolved. So therein came SEBI and said, let us revisit this whole ESG rating picture and introduce what they have introduced as 14 ESG parameters for rating of Indian companies by an India registered agency. Now, what I'm getting to is that 14 parameters that has been introduced by SEBI, of those 14, 5 of them again come from BRSR Core, which means to say if you have done your BRSR Core bit appropriately, perfectly, correctly, you would be clearly 36% ready for the rating agencies, getting a good rating from the rating agencies. So that's a clear added advantage of doing this BRSR Core right for any corporate. So that's number 3. Number 4 is that they have also issued guidelines to mutual fund houses in the share market in India, saying that you will, if at all, have a ESG scheme, something that's labeled as a ESG fund or ESG scheme. You will make sure that 65% of your funding goes into companies that are already reporting against BRSR core, and
Oh,
35% of the remaining will go for companies that are at least reporting on BRSR. Now, that is a guideline that was non-existent. So, mutual fund houses typically would have called an ESG scheme and this taken their own approach to judge who is the right company to invest, which is the right company to invest into. But now this guideline is there. Now there's going to be a lot of realignment of these schemes. So for you as a company to be attractive to that ESG fund house, you need to be, of course, BRSR core ready. That is when you will be more attractive. That is when funds will come to your company, right?
I hear you.
So there's quite a few different dimensions in which this whole BRSR core is going to shake up the whole space.
Got it. Got it. I absolutely understand that right now. And in fact, my next question was already like you partly answered for it, which I
Okay,
will ask anyways to see if there are any missing part. So,
sure,
what would be the impact on the ESG rating was my score? So, let me just reframe it.
sure.
Now that you mentioned that there would be 14 ESG parameters and 36% of
Of which,
which will be complete if you are already qualified for the BRSR core.
yeah,
So for folks who are kind of two-part question, maybe
yeah.
first is, so now we will have an Indian body with ESG rating. That's the first thing.
Hmm.
So, do you have any idea like which will be that Indian body? Will it be something like a regulatory body, will it be a independent body? How that will work out?
Yeah. So I'll answer that quickly.
Yeah,
Yeah. So the in the Indian context again, these are being called ERPs. I believe that's the global term, but I've just read it from what I read from the SEBI. So it's called ESG rating providers, ERPs. Right now, the ERPs, the way SEBI is envisaged, that planned is that they will be qualifying them based on criteria. There's something that they've created. I think two categories of ERPs that will be registered with SEBI, and then they will be the ones who can go ahead and issue the rating agency. So it's not a directly government owned rating agency, but government registered rating agency, right?
got it.
So that's what it will be. And in the context of the ratings that we said, I believe the way these things will pan out in the future is that companies that are, let's say, having global operations and of course a significant Indian presence will go for the Indian rating and also will go for a global rating. So there will be that transition time clearly when both those ratings will be globally operating entities in the coming years. So that's how I look at it. For the ERPs, there's enough and more criteria that has been put out by SEBI, and that is how they will be chosen.
So, will it be safe to say that the Sustainalytics and the MSCI has like nothing is stopping them from creating their Indian entity or the
Absolutely nothing.
yeah,
Absolutely nothing.
and they might have to kind of rerun their models in the rating models or whatever their underlying
Yeah,
infrastructure is based on the new data points for the BRSR core,
correct.
which more or less they will be anyways helping, or they will get this data anyways from the either from the organization or this third party assurers,
Yeah.
which they can easily collect, and then they can run their model of rating or scores that
Correct. Correct. So I believe someone like a Sustainalytics or for that matter S&P Global, whoever from the global agency space
right.
will have probably for the Indian market a separate offering,
Got
right?
it.
Apart from the fact that they will still continue their global offerings, which is of course globally accepted, they will also have an Indian offering for aligned for that is aligned with the Indian requirement. So that's how I foresee things panning out. And just to be clear, Vikram, these ESG 14 parameters that I mentioned is still something that we are picking from a consultation paper which was done in Feb by SEBI. They've said in their March release, the press release, that they will soon be issuing more guidelines. We are waiting for that to come out, and that will
Got,
make things more clear.
got it. And in the scheme of things, what we are talking is somewhere in the mid of like 3 to 4 years, like this, all things will consolidate, and maybe, as you mentioned, in the year 2025, 26, or 26, 27,
Yeah.
things will be much more clearer in this.
Much clearer. While we just spoke about the 150 companies and all of that for the
Right.
BRSR core, next year there's another expectation that SEBI has outlined again in the consultation paper so far, but I think that will still definitely make it to the final cut. What they've said is that next year 250 companies will also have to look at their supply chain players and
Wow.
see how they are performing on the parameters of BRSR core.
Right. And will this be applicable to all the supply chain, or then again the
So
top?
that boundaries, I think they have to still define. You're
Got it.
absolutely spot on that question because they've not defined. In fact, they clearly have mentioned in their release saying we will define the boundaries or we'll give you more specifics of what we mean by supply chain.
Got it.
So
Got it.
that
No,
is
no,
to come out. But even
absolutely.
if it is bare minimum, let's say one level upstream, one level downstream, you're still talking quite a lot considering these are companies in the top 250. These are large companies. They have large supply chains. They have enough and more coverage of different medium, small businesses also in the supply chain.
Right, right. I mean, you sound very excited, and for all the right reasons. So, at least in my my assessment,
Yeah.
and we have been working with one of the Indian consultant like 2 years back. We kind of worked with a kind of, not a product, but more like a digital tool, so that uh, to make it easy for the companies and the MF, and now you're talking about the rating agency, the audit, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
The elephant in the room, the big question I have on behalf of all the corporates,
Yeah.
uh, what can they do to prepare themselves with whatever information that they have?
Hmm.
What would be your like top three, top five advice for them? Like they can do this, this, and this, so that
Yeah.
they are not ill prepared, or they are not taken by surprise.
So what has again going back to BRR, BRSR, and everything that I painted in front of you? What at least today companies are fairly well versed with is the BRSR template or the BRSR requirement of reporting. Of course, what is the new kid on the block is the BRSR core, right?
Right.
Now, when we did a comparison, we are in our own team. We've done this comparison of what the BRSR core against the BRSR looks like.
Hmm.
Now, 88 indicators is what I said, performance indicators is what I said the BRSR core is all about. We mapped that 88 indicators to the 200 plus kind of questions that are there in the BRSR.
All right.
90% of them are either directly available in the BRSR or are traceable through the data that you have already furnished in the BRSR.
Yeah.
Means to say, even while you're doing your BRSR today, you are actually able to kind of prepare yourself if you're looking into the BRSR core, you can actually start preparing yourself for the BRSR core just organically. Now, of course, there will be that requirement for you to inform and educate about the BRSR core and be a lot more aware of it. That is there. But I think that's the kind of conversation that at least we are having with our clients when we are engaging with them on the BRSR template or BRSR reporting aspect. We are saying we will parallelly with the same in the same exercise start assessing you for your core. You don't have to publish it outside anywhere, but you still will know for sure where your standing is. You can
Got
know where your gaps are and start prepping for it in the year. You have a year's time, 2 years time, whatever, depending on where your ranking is in the 1 to 1,000 bucket. But you can use this as something that sets your direction and roadmap. And that's exactly what I'm saying would be a good approach.
Got it. So that's not so scary at all.
It
Uh,
isn't. It
yeah,
isn't.
and
Yeah.
for all the my data visualization friend or the analyst who is there. So imagine if you have a big circle and there is an circle inside that, like a Venn diagram sitting inside it.
Mhm.
So the inner circle is the 88 data point or
Yeah.
the indicator, and the outer circle has 200 plus the core
Yeah. Yeah.
BRSR question. So it
Although I think the BRSR core, 10% of it lies outside the BRSR, so it's not exactly concentric or inner and outer. There's a
got it.
part of it that is lying outside the BRSR. That
So
will come from more like the annual reports. The 10%
got
comes from the annual reports.
got it. Got it. Yeah. So that's why when you simplify it, you get more
Absolutely.
clarity.
Yeah.
Clarity.
Yeah.
Got it. Interesting. I just want to make a one segue and then we can come back to it.
Sure.
You mentioned something that you already help your client. So, uh, how do you kind of, in your day-to-day basis, how do you collect all those 200 data points? What can, if you are if you can share a little bit about what goes through into it, what is the timeline, or what is the operation time. So the basic idea of asking this question is if someone out there, as you mentioned, from
Hmm.
mid cap or especially the small cap one who are doing this
Hmm.
for the first time, they
Hmm.
get a picture of what goes in, how much effort goes into it, what is the timeline, where do they fill in the data, do
Yeah.
they get in an Excel sheet, or how many people needs to access that Excel sheet, like little bit of logistical.
Sure, sure. So to begin with, just to put things in context, in the BRSR, which is that 200 point questionnaire that I'm talking about,
Mm,
there are questions that ask for data for the current financial year and the previous financial year. So which means that if nothing, if just for those questions, you'll have to at least fetch data 2 years back.
got
Now,
it.
for somebody like you just said in the mid and small cap segment, talking about this whole sustainability reporting is itself a new ball game, and for them to now go back to their individual functions and departments and say you'll have to dig out data and share it with me is of course a tall order. Now,
Yes.
having said that, I think the whole exercise, at least for the first year, is going to definitely throw those challenges at us, and we've faced enough of them in our exercises ourselves, where you will have to sensitize the people to understand why is it required, because there's a mandate, because this is required for us to make sure that you are projecting your own company in the right way to the world out there.
Right.
Now, but that sensitization is what it is. Second is, of course, a lot of hand holding, and initially, trust me, Excel sheets are saviors, right? Clear, while all of us would, sheets is something these companies, these smaller companies that we're talking about, are far more easy to kind of they're comfortable with, right? So we would believe that having a template in an Excel format and say, let's walk this through you and let's see what data you have, and if it helps you, let's also look through your physical records, if at all. If not digital records, you may have physical records somewhere, and that's what we will go for.
Got
And
it.
all of those nitty gritties of filling in the data is what happens. And eventually it has to also have a top down direction. I mean, if the management isn't yet convinced to kind of drive their individual departments, I'm be very honest, it's a game that is going to be all the more tough, because there is a deadline. September end is the deadline for the annual report submission along with the BRSR submission. You're not too far from it if you're not even ready with your initial data. So we always also have to drive that mindset shift top at the top, at the very top. That's very
Right.
important as well.
Right.
So yeah, it's a mixed game there.
Got it. Uh, I just lost you in a between. Let me just make sure that we capture it again, so for our
Sure,
listener to get it.
sure.
You mentioned that Excel sheet is the
I
lifesaver.
said it's a lifesaver. Yeah.
Yeah. So so does that mean when you go into individual department and when you share your Excel sheet, you kind of send the entire template to that
No, no,
department?
definitely. I'll tell you what, even with splitting the Excel sheets into, let's say, an HR specific questionnaire,
Right.
finance questionnaire, or procurement questionnaire, even having done that, the kind of questions that are asked in there is going to definitely be a shocker of sorts for anybody who has to fill in the data.
Right.
Right. I just mentioned that there are questions that ask for 2 years data. In fact, very beginning of the BRSR, it asks you, do you want to report on a standalone basis, which means to say your Indian registered entity only, or do
Got
you
it.
want to report for every other branch that you may have in every other part of the world, which is
Right.
the global way. Now, that itself is a big question to ask. And where do we get all the data points from if we are operating in multiple countries? So all of those are challenges, for which reason we will definitely split the sheet into what is just relevant for that particular segment of the business and share it only that part of it with them.
Got it. I understand that now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have been collecting data for, I don't know, almost 15 years now.
Yeah,
And
with your background, you clearly understand data way better than anybody else. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you allow me, and being India, like this is one of my, I understand the ground reality. So I'm not
absolutely.
against the method. Like it is absolutely, and because it is so much changing, the things so much change, and there are so much nuances for
Yeah,
certain company that you cannot have one size fit all to all the company.
true.
I completely agree with that.
And
But
Vikram, just to extend, the Excel sheet folks today
hmm,
are to be actually gradually graduated to an ESG software-based recording.
got
You
it.
cannot stick to Excel sheets this year and the year after and the year after. That doesn't work. But then
Absolutely.
you cannot straight away throw this ESG software at them and ask them to start doing it. That will
Absolutely.
never
So
work.
yeah, that will definitely not work. The whole
Yeah.
comprehensive thing is so that is where an intermediate, more like a survey data, complex data collection tool with
Yeah.
integrated chat box is something that we highly recommend. I mean, definitely, it's a plug that I'm trying to make. But what I want to kind of emphasize, not for only the companies but also the consultants like you who will be working. See, there are 1000 companies, so definitely there will be at least 1000 such exercises going on at any given point of time. So
Yeah.
you have to kind of uh, uh, keep in mind that the thing with digital doesn't have to be a very at the so it doesn't have to be in a spectrum. It doesn't have
Hmm.
to be a very complex thing. Even if in on a simplest thing on a
Hmm.
page, the same as you collect on an Excel, but it will be on a web, because
Hmm.
you can share it with multiple people and because you can have all the conversation at one
Hmm.
place, that
Hmm.
that does not become just only the data collection tool, but it also
Hmm.
becomes a knowledge source for people.
Absolutely.
Because
Analytics and possibly even recommendations can come.
Eh, right. And what happens is you will have a platform or something where once you, if for any consultant like you, if you are
Hmm.
working with half a dozen companies, the learning that you have on rest of them can be easily broadcasted to the
Hmm.
to all of them, so that you don't have to keep sending them revise Excel sheet and stuff. You change
True.
it at one place and they get. I mean, and I'm sorry to kind of just, sidetrack the conversation,
No, 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 please.
but
Yeah.
India being the IT capital of the world, so
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
that is something I always kind of it. I understand there is the cost angle to it, and there is all the implementation headache and all that.
Yeah.
I agree to it, but I always feel that even with an MVC phase, that would be one of the approaches.
True.
But that doesn't mean like the one that you suggested is the more practical, tried and tested. In it is the current state that
Yeah.
people like to do, and it is people where even from the user side they are very much comfortable doing it.
Yeah.
That I completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
Anyways, we're just trying to get into the end of the episode. Is
Sure.
there any other point that you want to share that you haven't shared with me? And before I ask my last couple of questions.
Nothing that's not shared, but I think what is important is that as we engage with clients, anybody who's engaging with corporates out there, I think what is important, and I believe that's something we also kind of try to do to the extent that we can, is to tie this whole work on corporate sustainability to what we all know very obviously as sustainable development goals, which is where the impact aspect
Right,
comes out.
right,
Right. One is about the data points and what I'm doing, but at the end of the day, those data points should mean something for the global goals. That is where the whole conversation on sustainability began.
right.
So if we can also use this opportunity to kind of tie it back to the SDGs, that will probably be the right way to kind of knit it all together. That's the only last point I would make.
Right. If I want to take the liberty and convert it into a business terms, you have to come up with a business strategy so that you can come build more sustainable products so that you can benefit both the planet, people,
Correct.
and the prosperity of the world. Yeah,
Absolutely.
got
Absolutely.
it. That's the core of the whole. Otherwise, we are not collecting data for fun.
Yeah, absolutely no. No.
All right. So my last question, based on the theme of the podcast, is where do you see the possibility of scorecards in this whole exercise?
Uh, Clearly, I think scorecards is the way to go, considering the fact that these exercises that I'm talking about are also not just expecting the SEBI, the authority here, is not just expecting you to do a PDF based submission of these reports. Let me also bring that out. They're
Wow.
also expecting you to do a submission on in a format that's called XBRL, which you may be aware of.
Yes.
Now, the XBRL format is all about digitizing the data for analytics and data insights at some point, right? Now, that's the whole point. When you are talking about also digitizing data to that extent, it is eventually going to be used to compare peer to peer against about what's happening. And at the end of the day, the ESG ratings that are coming out based on the same platform, the foundation of BRSR, everything is at the end of the day about scorecards and doing or rather benchmarking yourself against the peers in that same space. So I believe we are heading in that direction very obviously with these things that are happening right now.
Okay. And would it be safe to say, based on whatever information that you have done,
Hmm.
uh, and because if I've seen one template in the past of BRSR, where you
Hmm.
mentioned about different departments and there are subsections, or there are I may say,
Hmm. 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 Hmm.
and to an extent that we can even do a theme wise comparison across industry or even companies, peer to peer, sector,
Hmm.
region, and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Got
No, no. So slicing and dicing of the information from the BRSR is absolutely possible, whether you want to do it on dimensions, which is E, S, G,
Oh,
that is one. Slicing
right,
and dicing could also be done in another way where you are talking of, in the whole context of the BRSR, there is a talk of 9 broad principles.
right.
So each principle is about a social angle or a governance angle or an environment. So you can see at a principle 1 to principle 9 level, where are you stacking up,
Got
right?
it.
So everything is of course every part of it is of course very obviously available for us to analyze and see where we can improve. So the answer to that is a big yes.
And will all this information readily available to the public? Will it needs to be disclosed openly
So
to the?
what they are doing is that the BRSR reports in both PDF and XBRL format are out there in public domain. That's
Oh,
the beginning of it all. It's for public consumption. It is always meant for. When I say public, I don't necessarily mean common man out there, but I'm just saying every stakeholder of every company, right?
got it,
Which
got it.
means it's got to be in a domain that is accessible. That is part one. And part two, from what I'm hearing, is that there is going to be sooner than later a online system which will be used to do these analytics. And this is not coming from a private party. This will come from a government authority, a ministry or a government authority, which will also do the analytics. And I'm sure at that level, when that happens, that will also be made accessible for right informed decisions to be made by different stakeholders.
Wow, I can see how this information can be used by different uh, mutual fund houses or auditors or ESR rate.
Investors, yeah,
Yes, yes.
anybody, yeah. I mean, clearly there's enough value for different stakeholders in different ways.
Got it. Got it. I mean, that's music to my ears already. Uh, Thank you so much. This has been great. Where can people find more about you online?
I think my LinkedIn would be the best way to reach me. I'm my LinkedIn is of course with my first name and last name, which is Anveshi Gutta. If you look me up, I'll be accessible there. That's the best way. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, I think Twitter, but not so much. LinkedIn is the best way.
Right. I'll mention your link in the show notes so that people can
Sure,
find it easily.
sure,
You shared that literature of the release, the press release that happened. Is
sure.
there a public link available to that also, where that we can add in the show notes for listeners?
Yes, I will. I will share that. Yes, it is available, of course, in the public domain.
Got it. We'll
Yeah.
mention that as well.
And
Perfect. Thank.
I will also volunteer to share an infographic on BRSR Core with a link to that that can also be made available to the audience.
Absolutely. And I think you have just mentioned this in your LinkedIn recently. So yeah,
Yes,
that's very useful. I've
sure,
gone.
sure.
Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vikram. Thanks for having me. It was wonderful talking.
All right. Thanks for listening. If you have found this conversation useful, please subscribe to Sustainability Scores podcast to join me again next time.